Good morning. Morning. We're going to try that again. My voice is a little scratchy this morning, but good morning to you. This is it's a late arriving crowd. I don't know, did we have anything going on last night that kept people out late? I don't know about you. I woke up this morning with show tunes in my head, but I woke up with a Barry White voice. So that was a real, last night for me was a real emotional high to have a chance to hear from Chris, and then the concert with Brian I thought was fantastic. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're sitting here wondering what people are talking about this morning, next time I tell you to not skip something, believe me, you don't want to miss out. We've got a great day planned today, and kicking off with a terrific panel that we'll introduce in just a moment. But it's another full day, and we've got some heavier topics, and we've got some lighter ones too for you today. But I hope that you'll really continue to lean in to the conversations. So today is not Wiley Cash Day. That was yesterday. You only get one, Wiley. I'm sorry. But you do get to spend some time with Wiley this morning. So let me welcome to the stage Pete McDaniel and James Dodson and Wiley Cash. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I was with you yesterday talking about international terror and climate change and white supremacy and racial violence, and then in the afternoon it was, divorce and the death of parents, and so today we're going to talk about golf. And
which embodies all those things.
Which embodies all of those things, exactly. That's very true. I really enjoy watching golf. I've never been a big golfer, which may explain why I'm wearing blue jeans. They won't allow me on the course in these, so I'm aware of with whom I'm sitting. It's a pleasure to be with these two guys, and more than that, it's really an honor to be with these two. And I will introduce them to you as I begin talking to them. And I want to begin with you, Pete, here to my left. Pete, before I ask you what drew you to writing about golf, I want to ask you what drew you to the sport in the first place. But before I do, I want to introduce you to this audience. Pete McDaniel is a freelance golf writer, and he was a contributing editor, senior writer for Golf Digest and Golf World magazines for 19 years. His primary responsibility with Golf Digest for 14 of those years was to collaborate on instruction and feature articles with a little-known athlete named Tiger Woods. Pete was the sports editor of the Hendersonville Times-News for 13 years, where he earned several North Carolina Press Association Writing Awards. He's the recipient of the Harlem YMCA's Black Achiever in Industry Award and co-author of the late Earl Woods' best-selling book, Training a Tiger. In addition, he co-authored Tiger Woods' all-time best-selling golf instruction book, How I Play Golf, and wrote the critically acclaimed Uneven Lies, the heroic story of African Americans in golf. Pete also co-wrote and co-produced the documentary Uneven Fairways, which aired on the Golf Channel. Among his honors are Publisher of the Year and inductee into both the African American Golfers Hall of Fame and National Black Golf Hall of Fame, plus the Denzel Washington Community Service Award presented by the White Plains, New York Boys and Girls Club. Most importantly, at least to me, Pete is an alumnus of the University of North Carolina, Asheville. So Pete, back to my question before I rattled off your many accomplishments. What drew you to golf as a young person, and then how did you find yourself writing about it eventually?
Before I answer that question, I'd like to first acknowledge how grateful I am to be home. As you and some others know, I've had some very trying times recently, but God is faithful. He has brought me home one more time to my beloved UNC Asheville. and I'm thankful for each and every one of you. I got into golf because I wanted to earn some folding money. Biltmore Forest Country Club was my introduction. I had a brother, an older brother, and some cousins who caddied. And I was left at home to kind of roam. And the first time I saw them come home with $4 or $5 in their pocket, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So that's how I got introduced. I was too young. I was 11 years old, and you had to be 12 years old in order to caddy at Biltmore Forest Country Club. But my parents knew the caddy master there. And so he said, come on out, we'll give you an opportunity. And that's what life is all about, opportunities. And so that's how I got involved. I started out as a shag boy. And for those of you who don't know, a shag boy is like a glorified golden retriever. And what you do basically is you take a small bag of golf balls in the practice area, and you dump the balls out at the player's foot, and then you race out into the practice range, and he hits balls at you. And so I became so proficient after a few times caddying and shagging that I could actually take that golf bag, that small bag, and catch the ball in the air. If I had a good enough golfer, that's what was required, you know. If I had a bad golfer, I'd be dodging golf balls all afternoon. But that's how I got involved. And I will say my first set of clubs came from a member at Biltmore Forest Country Club, a set of wooden shafted golf clubs. I had a 3-iron, a 5-iron, a 7-iron, and a 9-iron. And he gave me those clubs and said, take them home and see what you can do with them. And that's how I got involved in golf in the first place.
What was your path to eventually writing about golf?
My parents told me that I was writing when I was 4 or 5 years old. I did little skits and little poems and stuff like that, and I would entertain their guests when they came over to party. They'd call me out, and I'd do a little recitation of something that I'd written, something silly from TV, I'm sure, cartoons, probably the Three Stooges or something like that. And the applause that I would get from their guests boosted my ego and gave me confidence. And so I started out as a lyricist. I wrote songs, I wrote poetry, little skits. And so I had that writing gift from a very early age. And I, going through school, I was a pretty good student, but I knew after geometry in the 10th grade that I did not want to see another math class. So when I came to UNC Asheville, I went 4 years, and I think my senior year, I took an economics? I think it was an economics class, and I barely got through it. So I decided right then and there that I was going to make my living somehow writing, and that's how I got into writing.
Okay, great. Jim, I want to ask you those two same questions. What drew you to golf in the first place? But then what were some of your early breaks and opportunities to write about something that you love? But before I do, I want to introduce you to this audience. James Dodson is a 2-time winner of the United States Golf Association's Best Book of the Year. He is the author of 10 books, including The Range Bucket List, Final Rounds, American Triumvirate, A Golfer's Life with Arnold Palmer, and Ben Hogan, An American Life. Over the course of his career, Jim, his work has earned awards from the Golf Writers of America and other industry organizations. For 2 decades, he was a contributing editor and regular columnist for Golf Magazine and golf and travel correspondent for the Departures Magazine of American Express. He previously served as the Lewis D. Rubin Jr. Writer-in-Residence at Hollins University. He lives with his wife in Greensboro, North Carolina. And most importantly for me, Jim was the first editor to give me a chance to write nonfiction. And I have been forever grateful that he let me spread my wings and take that on. So Jim, thank you for being here with us. And I want to go back to those questions. What drew you to golf, and what were your early opportunities in getting to write about it?
Well, let me say, Wiley, that star, there's a little star on my bio there for bringing you into our arts magazines. I had a father who was a newspaper guy, and my first memories of he went from the Washington Post to the Dallas Morning News, and then he started his own little newspaper in Mississippi. And when his silent partner, disappeared with the funds one day after the Kiwanis luncheon, cleaned out the newspaper, and the state police showed up. My father lost his partner. He picked up the phone and got a job in Florence, South Carolina, which was real Dixie and aspic in those days. Pete and I are both 70, so we can say these things. We're old guys now, with no filters, right? That's
true.
So anyway, when we moved home to Greensboro, which was my kind of ancestral home, I grew up, my dad loved golf, like most newspaper guys do, and I tagged around with him on the golf course, and I fell in love with the game. That was probably like Pete, we watched Charlie Sifford and Jack Nicklaus, that era of those guys come up, and I just found golf, and Arnold Palmer, of course, was the king, and I dreamed of meeting him, and when I was 13, I wrote this is the start of this book, The Range Bucket List. I wrote out a list of, I think it was 11 things I wanted to do in golf, and one of them was to meet Bobby Jones, and the other was to meet Arnold Palmer, and the third was to play on the PGA Tour, which right now I'm not real happy with the PGA Tour, so I don't want to play on it anymore. There's no chance I'll go make it. I played on it as a reporter and writer for many years, so. Anyway, it was really a father I tagged after, and I had this wonderful father. I wrote a book called Final Rounds that came out in '96. It was a simple memoir about taking my dad when he was dying of cancer back to play these courses where he learned to play the game as an airman, a lonely Carolina airman on the coast, Lancashire coast, right before D-Day. And it was at Lytham St. Anne's, one of the great venues of the British Open. And the players, the members there had a deal with American soldiers that you could come and play golf there and borrow the clubs of members who were off in Burma and places like that. So my dad learned to play golf. We'd always talked about taking this trip. And when I heard his cancer had come back, we decided to take off and do it. And we went for 10 days. My mother walked us to and the point is, I was trying to tell the story of how I got into this game. He was a wonderful guy. My nickname for him was Opti the Mystic, because he was the most philosophical, happy human being I'd ever met. It's embarrassing to have a father like that when you grow up, because he'll speak to strangers in grocery stores and pet little kids on the head, and it's, he just never had a bad moment. I could never figure out why. Long story short, we go on this journey, and we got rained out and a lot of courses, but we walked 5 courses. He also had a colostomy bag, and it was a struggle, but it was also exalted. And I wrote this book. It came out, I thought, if it sold 300 copies in fall of 1996, and my mother bought the first 200, I knew it would, it might do well. We just got a statement. I think it's sold now over 800,000 copies, and it's in 9 languages, so it's amazing. You tell us, no, I had nothing to do with that. I just wrote the book. Pete can tell you, we don't have any control when we let it go. My point is just that was my thank you to this marvelous man who taught me about race and right and wrong and golf. And of course, golf is a game of rules, although you wouldn't know it now. It's doing the right thing. You don't cheat. So that's the long-winded story right there.
Well, I think it's so wonderful that both of you were brought into the game by family, seeing your older siblings and people in your family come home with that folding money, which I love hearing that description, and then wanting to be like your dad and be with your dad. But one thing that I find so fascinating about the journey both of you have been on in the game is it is rare for those of us who write to be in the presence of true greatness. And both of you have been. I feel like I mentioned yesterday to Kwame Alexander that I studied under Ernest Gaines, and I felt like that was my brush with greatness. And you know, you both have been in the presence of greatness many, many times and have gotten to work very closely with those greats. And so I want to talk about that a little bit and begin with you, Pete. What was your path to first working with Tiger Woods? And what was that experience like?
Well, I was working at Golf World magazine after leaving Hendersonville, the Times News. And Tiger was being considered for Man of the Year, Golf World's Man of the Year. He was fresh off of his first U.S. Amateur Championship in 1994. And luckily for me, or fatefully for me, I was assigned a story. It's a cover story, my first cover story at Golf World. And so I fly out to Stanford to interview him. I meet him at the golf shop at Stanford's golf course. In walks this kid that I'd seen on TV a few times, and he orders some breakfast. He orders a stack of pancakes about so high, 2 glasses of orange juice, and I prepared this long list of questions that I'm going to ask him. So I started asking him the questions, and he never looks up from those pancakes. He's wolfing them down, and he's giving me one-word answers. Yes, no. Well, what do you mean by that? So after about 10 minutes into my interview, I have absolutely nothing. And finally, I ask him something. He looks up from the pancakes, finally, and he starts giving me these very insightful answers. We leave there, go down to the practice range, and he starts trying to impress me by hitting all of these shots, the low hooks and the high fades. And, you know, I grew up a Jack Nicklaus fan. That didn't impress me one bit. And so I left there. As I was leaving, he said, now go write a good story, Mr. McDaniel. So I get back to the office. I write this cover story. Comes out. Earl Woods calls me and says, Pete, I need to talk to you about something. I said, okay, Earl. He says, you did a great job with my son's story. That was really nice. He says, how busy are you? I said, well, Earl, I'm covering the LPGA. I have a TV column. I'm covering colleges. Why? He said, well, I'm thinking about writing a book, and I thought I might ask you to help me write it. And I said, on second thought, Earl, I'm not that busy. So we write Training a Tiger. It comes out, Tiger wins the 1997 Masters, becoming the youngest player in history to do so. The next day, Earl and Tiger are on the Oprah Winfrey Show with a copy of Training a Tiger. And Oprah is reading these words that I have written. And my head got this big. That began a journey with Tiger and his family that has lasted to this day, as a matter of fact. So Earl told me after Training a Tiger came out, he said, Pete, you will always and forever be linked with the Woods family. And I have been. You know, I'm 70 years old now, so I'll be 71 pretty soon, Jim. And, but working with Tiger, getting to know him, being considered an insider, actually kind of part of the family, it really launched my career. And, you know, between that and covering people like Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, my idol, and Charlie Sifford, and learning about the real history of the game. And I guess we'll talk about that later. It's just been a great, great ride. The one thing I will tell all of you, the greatest pleasure, as far as I'm concerned, in life is if you find a profession, if you find your gift, first of all, and you are able to earn $1 doing something that you absolutely love to do and that you're pretty good at, doesn't get any better than that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What was it like to be someone who had so looked up to players like Jack Nicklaus, people who are older than you, to suddenly be writing about a young man who's younger than you, who is showing so much potential and so much mastery of an incredibly difficult game? What was that generational adjustment like? I mean, we'd never seen anything like Tiger Woods at that age, especially.
It was huge. You know, I had sons who were older than Tiger, you know, which was, you know, kind of crazy at the time. But Jim and I grew up in this era where you earned everything that you got. And Tiger had this kind of air about him. He grew up in a neighborhood far away from Asheville in Cypress, California. And his environment was so different from mine. Not only were we generations apart, but culturally we were so far apart. He had not been around very many black people at all. He was a black combination, if there is such a thing, you know. He suffered from an identity crisis. So dealing with that and getting to know him and understand exactly who he was, he understood his gift. But the one thing he told me that resonates even today was the fact that he understood he had a gift. But he said, that's not what makes me who I am. He says, my parents, what we believe in, and the main thing that I have that will never be taken away from me is hard work, his work ethic. He said, no one is ever going to outwork me. And I can tell you stories for days about how this guy would go to the golf course at 5 o'clock in the morning, go through his physical fitness regimen, and hit golf balls, working on one particular thing in his swing for hours and hours in the Orlando heat. And that's what made Tiger Woods great.
So Jim, I would ask you the same question, you know, in your experience with Arnold Palmer, who I know you've worked with closely and know his family very well. What was that experience working so closely with someone you had grown up watching? I mean, it would be the equivalent of, you know, me getting to hang out with Michael Jordan all the time and just be in that environment.
Well, it came out of final rounds. Sam Snead's in final rounds because he won Greensboro 8 times. And Snead had asked me to write, after final rounds came out, he called me up, and you all know who some of you with hair like mine would know who Sam Snead is. He called me, he said, Jim, it's Sam Snead. I just read that book you wrote about your daddy, and I want you to write my autobiography. And I said, well, Sam, I think you've written your autobiography 3 times already. He said, no, damn it, but I ain't done living yet. And so I promised him we would do that. And meanwhile, Final Rounds comes out. It's surprisingly on the bestseller list. I get a call. We lived in Maine at the time, and I get a call from my publicist at Benham, and she says, we want you to go on a book tour in November. And I said, great, I can do it next weekend. She said, no, we want you to go for 3.5 weeks because we want to peddle it for Christmas. Long story short, they send me all the way down the East Coast, all the way across the South, all the way to the West Coast, up the West Coast, across the northern tier to Canada. I get home 2 nights before Christmas Eve in our little town. If you ever bought anything from L.L. Bean, that's where Wendy and I lived. And it's going to snow that night as a forecast. And I'd promised the wonderful old Dartmouth bookseller who ran the bookshop in our town that I would come over and sign books on 2 nights before Christmas Eve. Well, I knew nobody would be there. A, it was going to snow, and B, Mainers are the cheapest, or shall I say, most frugal people on the earth. They were never going to buy a new book except for my golf buddies. But I was tired. I'd been on the road for 3.5 weeks. I was really worn out. And the wife had taken the kids up to grandma's in northern Maine, and I thought, I'm just going to settle in, pour a bourbon, build a fire, and go to bed. And then I remembered, oh my gosh, I got to go do this book signing. So I got in my old truck. In those days, you remember your phone is attached to your vehicle in 1996? So I drive over to the bookshop, and there's 2 cars in front of it, and it's sleeting, and I'm getting ready to blow the whole thing off, and the phone rings. And I think, don't answer it, don't answer it. Now then I answer it, what the heck? And this woman says, very nice, sweet voice, says, Mr. Dodson, this is Winnie Palmer calling. I just wanted you to know Arnold and I have just finished reading Final Rounds, her words, and we think it's the most beautiful book we've ever read. And we'd like to ask you if you're interested in writing Arnold's autobiography and sharing the cover with him. How would you feel about that? Well, I said, Mrs. Palmer, I'd really feel very wonderful about that. And I hesitated because the bubble over my head reads, this is not Winnie Palmer. This is a waitress at Ham's Pub in Greensboro, North Carolina, where my best friend Patrick Robert McDade, AKA the Irish Antichrist, he had been needling me for months about this book, and he was at the pub and he'd gotten this waitress to wind me up, to call up and pretend. So I said the following, this is a true story. I said, well, Mrs. Palmer, I really would be honored. The truth is, the Nicholases are coming to Maine this year for Christmas, and I'm on the way to pick them up at the airport, and I'm gonna take them to a party down on Small Point, and I gotta tell you, if it goes tonight like it did then, Winnie Palmer and I Barbara Nicholas and I are gonna get absolutely hammered and make out like bandits. I'll have to call you back. And I hung up on her. The funny moment is I sat there for 10 or 20 seconds waiting for the phone to ring and the Antichrist to say, hey, you got me. It didn't ring. So I go in, I sign my books, I get it. Now it's pouring snow. And I drive up, and if you live in Maine, nobody goes out when it's the first snowstorm of the season. We lived on the west side, I call it the Blue Ridge side of this fancy town. I drive up the long hill, shovel my way to the door. We lived up in the woods, go in, just the old dog and I, turn up the heat. And you know, in those days, your answering machine was on the wall and had a little red light, and I pushed the button, and I poured myself a nice bourbon, and then I pushed the button, and I'm drinking it, and I hear this same voice, nice lady, say, Mr. Dodson, this really is Winnie Palmer calling. Arnold thought that was the funniest thing he's ever heard, and he said to tell you, now he wants you to do the book more than ever, but he's gone to bed. Will you call us in the morning? So I dropped to my bony Episcopalian knees and thanked the Lord the Palmers had a sense of humor. And I called them, and I met them at the Wilmette dinner down in Boston 2 weeks later, and had embarked on it was supposed to be a 3-year project. Winnie came down with cancer after the first year, but I lived and traveled everywhere with him. And when I go on the speaking tour, which I'm just coming out of because these 3 books I'm working on right now, it's been fun, and people always want to hear these stories about the wonderful times I had with Arnold. He was great. He was the most. I've been around a lot of. In my former life, I was a political and journalist down in Atlanta, and I have never seen anybody. I've covered 3 presidential campaigns. I've never seen anybody as comfortable in their skin who's got that kind of level of fame as Arnold Palmer. And the reason every man loved him, every woman loved him. He was a real man of the people. He could walk with kings but keep the common touch, as Kipling wrote. We became great friends, and I was with him 2 weeks before he died. And he, last thing he said to me was, I need to see more of you, and next time don't come up here again unless you bring Wendy. He fell in love with my wife, so that's all right. You know?
And I might add,
No, go ahead.
if he met you one time,
Yep.
he would remember your name.
I've never seen anybody that could do that.
Yeah. Phenomenal.
It was incredible. He was a real, when he burst through in 58 and 60 and 61, 2, 3, 4, his last major, the Masters, golf not only doubled in size, it was, by the time he left, between like 1960 and 1985, and when he started on the senior tour, golf was 10 times larger in terms of participation in the United States. Nobody's ever come close to that, even the great triumvirate of Britain. So we won't see his likes again. I was with him when a lot of moral, interesting questions came up, and he was this true blue. And like listening to this live stuff now, I know exactly, I've been asking. It's like when Tiger had his wreck, several media people called me to ask about Hogan's comeback from his terrible disaster. And there's a lot of parallels. But Arnold's would never sanction the stuff that's going on now. And I think he would be heartbroken to see these were true American believers. And anyway, that's enough. You don't want to hear about the live, do you?
We'll talk about that at the end.
All right.
We'll talk about
sorry
that.
to bring that out.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Pete, you've dedicated much of your writing career to shedding light on the golf communities that have been historically overlooked. Can you tell us a little bit about your work on Uneven Lies and Uneven Fairways, the documentary?
Yeah, it is it's the work that I'm most proud of. Having grown up in Asheville and, being bused from an all-black school to an all-white school when I was 12 years old, I came face to face with racism. And it became actually a daily part of my life. And once I got into golf, I discovered that it followed me to the golf course. I played junior golf at Beaver Lake. I played in a junior golf tournament. I was the only black face. And I found that the game of golf gave me somewhat of a refuge, because we were all out there trying to compete. And you didn't really have a lot of negativity, especially of the racist kind. So that attracted me to the game itself. I've always been a historian. I developed that sense of history from my uncle Alvin Spain, who told me a lot about our people and where we came from. He was the family historian. So naturally, that became kind of a hallmark of my career. How Uneven Lives came about, Wally Uline, the president and CEO of Titleist FootJoy Worldwide at the time, had an employee named Craig Bowen. And Craig knew that I was from Asheville, and he knew about the Skyview Invitational and the fact that I grew up with the Thorpes, Jim Thorpe and Chuck Thorpe and James Black and all these black golfers. And Wally wanted him to research black golf in America. So he came to me and he said, Wally wants to do a documentary on black golf. So I meet with Wally, and so Wally says, Pete, I've got another idea. He says, I think we're getting the cart before the horse. I think what we need to do is write a book first. And that's how Uneven Lives came about. But the interest was always there because I couldn't understand why we were denied access, and by we, I mean blacks, were denied access to public golf facilities that we actually paid for with our taxes. And I found out that there were reasons. There was this inequity. And so in researching Uneven Lives, I discovered that we had been in the game in this country from day one. By that I mean blacks. And I had been pretty much lied to because the supposition was that we had never contributed anything to this game, and that we were not a part of the game in this country. And then in further research, I found out why, because there was a Caucasian-only clause which restricted membership in the PGA of America and competition in its events to white males. Not only were blacks and other minorities discriminated against, women were discriminated against. You couldn't be a member of the PGA of America if you were a woman. And that clause was added to the PGA of America's bylaws in 1934, and it was not removed until 1961. So all of these guys, all of these black guys who were professional golfers seeking to just earn a living doing what they were gifted to do, were shut out of the game. Players like Charlie Sifford, Ted Rhodes, Bill Spiller, these were great players of their day, forced to play in the Negro leagues of golf. And those are the same guys that I knew at the Skyview. They came through here from all over the South, and some from the West Coast and some from up north. And I knew their stories. They had told me all of these stories about how they had to, when they traveled, they had to stay in a hotel that would allow them, they stayed in the same room. Sometimes They stayed at a truck stop or a rest area just to play a game that they loved. It hit me right here. I didn't understand it, but in researching the book, I found out that we had contributed mightily to this game. You'll have to read the book. I've got a copy of it somewhere. But it is the work that like I said, I'm most proud of. Very enlightening story. You know, a lot of people think that black golf began and ended with Tiger Woods. It did not. It started in 1896. 1896, when a black man named John Shippen shared the lead in the 1896 U.S. Open after the first round. He was a caddy, just like me. And when I found out he was a caddy just like me, that really, really triggered my curiosity. Most of the players that I grew up with, the players who played in the Skyview, started out caddying. And, you know, so it's a fascinating story. It's part of our history. It's American history. It's not African American history. It's the history of golf. So.
Can you tell us a little bit about Skyview?
Oh, Skyview. Skyview is celebrating, I think, its 60th anniversary. It's a black golf tour event that was created by guys like Billy Gardenhite, who is an icon, an Asheville icon, a black player. And it was specifically for those players who could not play on the PGA Tour. They would come through, they had a whole circuit up and down the East Coast. And these tournaments kind of mimicked the PGA Tour, except they had much smaller purses. For example, on the PGA Tour in 1960, Jim, you can help me with this. First place money might have been $5,000 maybe.
That would have been on the high end. That was for a major.
Yeah, that was for a major championship.
Yeah.
Well, first place money in the Skyview in 1960 would have been maybe $300, $350. Yeah. So it had all of the intrigue of the PGA Tour, but much smaller fields, and played on municipal golf courses, unkept golf courses, but it gave these guys an opportunity to compete. And believe it or not, some of those guys advanced from the Black Golf Tour all the way up to the PGA Tour. And some of them did quite well. A couple of them won, as a matter of fact. Charlie Silver, Jim Thorpe, those guys. It was their training ground. So that's the Skyview. It meant a whole lot to me because it was the first place that I'd ever seen. I grew up, you know, following Arnold Palmer, and I think I wrote this in the book about how golf to me was a guy who hitched his pants and smoked on a cigarette, and I never knew that we really played the game at that level until I started meeting these guys at the Skyview. These guys could play, and they dressed sharp too. You know, I like that part of it, you know, and they were characters. Oh my gosh, we'd go out and party some and have a good time. I was a kid. I was probably 16, 17 years old, and running with these guys, going to local nightclubs, and where I shouldn't have been, but I was. Found out their life stories, and most of them had come up just like me. Most of them were from the South. They understood the limitations that society placed on you, and they fought through it. They were my heroes too, absolutely, because they loved the game and they contributed a lot to it. And it was all about the competition, you know, which is what life is about. We all compete, but that's the Skyview. And I think July 11th through the 13th at Asheville Municipal, you can get to see some pretty good golfers.
Jim, you have written obviously a lot about golf, but you've written about a lot of other things as well. But one thing that you've done that I really admire in writing about golf is you have been vulnerable enough to bring readers into your own life through your love of golf, particularly in final rounds and also in range bucket list. Can you talk about using sport as a way, as an entree to that connection with readers, that personal experience, and any stories that come to mind, maybe especially from range bucket list?
You know, first of all, Pete and I are children of the apartheid South. My dad was a newspaper man in this heated world, and we have all the similar memories. Mine is from the white kid version, but we've come to the same point in our lives where we understand the dynamic and how it needed to change. So we were sitting in the green room just sharing almost identical stories from each other's opposite of view. And another thing I wanted to say was, golf is essentially, it was created by canny Scott shepherds. And if you go to Scotland today, most of the golf courses are public. Around Edinburgh and the major championship courses, and certainly around London, but even you can go to England and you'll find you can play, and anybody can play those golf courses. It was a yeoman's game. It was a blue collar game. America invented country clubs, and they were all socially stratified. You had the robber barons of the early 20th century creating these exclusive places where you came if you had access. The Vanderbilts, you ever heard that name here in Asheville? They built the Carnegies, they all built golf courses, clubs, and they wanted a club because they wanted to fraternize and play sport with their own types. So I think that's one of the great things about golf history, and Pete and I are golf historians primarily, that you see this social evolution. I mean, I think the country club is modeled on the London country house. The golf club, the country club outside of Boston where they played the Open last year was created for people to come out and have picnics and row on lakes and play badminton, really classic white experiences, right? Sports, I'm just being facetious. But that's what it was designed for. And from that, golf came in. Donald Ross, you know, that name, he came in, he builds a golf course, and the rest is history, and he builds Pinehurst. It was about exclusion in America from the beginning. But the good news in America is every farmer out in the Midwest wanted to play golf, so they went out to their pasture and mowed. And you can still see there's 4 times as many public courses in America as private courses. I think why Tiger Woods and Pete's writing finally broke into the barrier is so important. And I forgot your question. You want to hear why the intimacy of the game. Look, golf is a game. You play it, and Pete will concur with this. You play it for 2 hours or 4 hours, and you may be playing it with your friends. I argue it's the most social and the most intimate sporting event you'll ever do. You have one big opponent, that's you, controlling your brain. And yet, you meet more people. I've made my best friends through the world of golf, except for Wiley. And there's hope for him yet, maybe. It's a game you're never going to win. It's always going to kick you in the teeth. You're never going to get, old man par is unbeatable. These Scots, they created it to torture us. And they've done a great, the British Open's coming up. Just watch it on TV and watch those people. So the reason I wrote the range bucket list, and that's the list I told you about, all these things I wanted to do, I did them all in a weird kind of way. I never imagined for a minute that I would end up having written actually what's 4 books of the year in the golf world, because 2 came from another entity. I never imagined that, because I was on the fast track. I was at the Sunday magazine of the Atlanta Constitution, and turned down the Washington Post when I burned out after covering every bullet-headed sheriff in North Georgia and every Klansman, unrepentant Klansman in Alabama, and the missing and murdered in Atlanta. I was in all of that, and I burned out in 1982, and I fled to a stream in Vermont to learn to fly fish. I wrote a book called Faithful Travelers. That's my favorite. It's still in print, about taking my daughter Maggie when she was 7 and our old golden retriever around the country to fly fish and camp all summer. And that's the kind of cleansing I needed to do. And golf saved me. I went to work, instead of the Washington Post, I went to Yankee Magazine. Is there a Yankee in here? I know you know it. Raise you're probably subscribers. I was their first Southerner and only senior writer in their 80-year history, and it changed my life. I was suddenly writing about things that people did, history, culture, that saved their, and it saved my life. Golf saved my life. I got a call one day from, I wrote a piece about a woman named Glenna Collett-Vare, who was the Bobby Jones of her time in the 1920s. An amazing woman. She won 6 women's opens. And I went to see her and write a story about her. I thought she would let me caddy for her. She was 80 years old, playing in her 69th Point Judith Invitational. I knocked on her door in Narragansett, Rhode Island, and this grande dame said, "Come in," and she was up a ladder thumping her old cleek against the ceiling. She turned to me and she said, "Young man, have you ever had raccoons in your rafters?" And I said, "Well, it depends who you talk to." And then she said, "Come up here and thump this ceiling till the critter man gets here." She came down, I went up. We became, she refused to let me caddy for her. We became fast friends. I wrote a column about her, a story in Yankee about her called Making, she put me to work chopping vegetables. She said, "Can you chop vegetables without cutting a finger off?" And I made her soup with her, and then she agreed to talk with me about golf in the South where she used to play, and we became great friends. I saw her for 4 years in a row. That story ran in Yankee Magazine. 4 magazines around the world picked it up, and I got a call from Golf Magazine. And so I entered the golf world. And that's my tribute to that unsurprising. And what Pete said, I was following my father into writing and journalism, but I also wanted a path of my own. And I liked, kind of had fun writing about unrepentant Klansmen, because you get that close to crazy. You don't get that close to crazy that often. And it was really important. I felt that was the important writing. But I fell in love with golf because, as Pete knows, it's an anguishing game. It's a beautiful game. It's a solitary game. It's a social game. And now I'm afraid it's owned by a foreign entity. Just, never mind.
Well, I still want to talk about that and some time we have left. And if y'all have questions, there'll be time for some questions at the end. You mentioned writing about the female golfer from the South. And Pete, I know that you've covered the LPGA quite extensively. Can you talk about how you've seen the women's game evolve over time along with the PGA?
Yeah, the women's game has really evolved into an international sensation, I believe. It is much more diverse than the men's game in that you have Koreans who really are the stars on the LPGA. One of my great friends, and I mentioned this to you, was Kathy Whitworth. People think, they're amazed at Tiger Woods. He's won 85 times. Sam Snead has won 85 times. But few people realize that Kathy Whitworth is the ultimate winner in professional golf with 88 titles. And what a lady, what a gentlewoman, a kind woman. But talking about the LPGA, I've long thought, and I've written this too, that the average golfer would get more from watching the women play the game than any other professional golfer. We can't duplicate or replicate what the PGA Tour stars do. We're old duffers, and most of us will never reach that level of expertise. But the women's game is something that we can emulate. Their golf swings are pure honey. I mean, and their short games, their putting, and they are true competitors. And they're nice to look at too, which makes it even better. But yeah, the evolution of the women's game has been tremendous. It's been very exciting on the world stage, and you have all of these stars. We just don't appreciate it as much as we should, But it's been great, absolutely.
An insight, I covered the tour for 7 years for golf and the women's tour. This was Beth Daniel, this was Akamoto, this is even Annika Sorenstam. I was invited to do her book. I couldn't do it because I did Hogan's book. What I loved, I got sick of the men's tour pretty quick. It was changing. You had agents coming in all the time. I went over to the women's tour for about 5 years for golf, and I loved it. The other thing about them is they were grateful. They appreciated what they had, the opportunity to do. They welcomed reporters. They were so open. It was a breath of fresh air. Plus, it's just more fun to hang out with women than guys any day. So it was wonderful. I had a blast doing that.
Did you find the PGA Tour was more commercially driven?
Oh, yeah.
With the agents and the money at the top?
That started in about 1990, and that's when I told George Pepper, I just want to write about the game. And I did a column called The Golf Life, and I did like 8 years of it, and I never wrote about a professional tour player unless he was utterly forgotten and turning to seed somewhere. I wanted to write about the real game. Because, and Pete knows this as well as I do, and Tiger Manifold doubled that by stratospherically. You had all these commercial interests. Everybody wanted to get into the game, and that brought reams of PR people, and suddenly you couldn't get any access to anybody. So I've been a big proponent ever since of the amateur game, and hackers. I love, if you're a duffer in here, I need to talk with you. I want to write about you, because those are the people that love the game. Barney Adams, who created Adams Golf, once said to me, Jim, golf is an iceberg, and this is the top of the iceberg. That's professional golf. And down here under the water is this huge island of ice. And that's the real game of golf. And that's how the Scots created it, and it stays that way to this day.
In my lifetime, I've been a very casual observer of golf. I'm a big sports fan, but didn't grow up playing golf. But there have been two seminal moments when I felt I was witnessing something monumental, something transformational. The first occurred with Tiger Woods winning his first major at the Masters in April 1997. I was a freshman here at UNC Asheville. I watched the final round in the basement of Scott Hall right here on campus because I didn't have a TV in my room. I watched it in the TV in the student lounge down there. And I remember seeing this young person of color who was maybe a year older than me beating all of these people who I knew were excellent. And I had, at that time, never heard of Tiger Woods. And I just thought, this is going to change everything. And so Pete, as someone who knew the game before and someone who's followed the game since, what was it like to witness Tiger in the wake of Tiger after that Masters win in '97? And culture, politics, all of it.
Well, I have to set the scene for you, that final round. And I think this may explain exactly why I'm so passionate about that 1997 victory. So final round, you came up number 18, the 72nd hole, and fans stretched from the tee box all the way up to the green. 20 or 30 deep, I believe it was. And so I'm covering him exclusively for Golf World. And so I race up. I try to race. At Augusta National, you can't race. You have to walk as quickly as you can, but you cannot run. So I'm trying to make my way up to the green because I know Earl is there waiting for him and his mother. And there's this coronation that's going to be otherworldly. And it just so happens that Tiger hits a drive all the way over the left bunker. And he has like a sand wedge in. He was totally demolished in the golf course all week long. And as I'm walking up to the green, I spot several Augusta National employees who look like me. They were lining the veranda, and all of them had these smiles on their faces, and they were so engaged watching their conquering hero, march to victory. And it just occurred to me that these guys and ladies had worked at that club for years, maybe decades, and they'd never seen anything like this before in their lives. And that is what really hit me. That's when it hit home, that this was a cultural revolution happening before our very eyes. And then you fast forward over the years and you see how his emergence as a conquering hero really opened up the game. He had fans of all colors, all ages. I mean, I wrote about this too. He had blue-haired women who had never had any interest in the game at all. Suddenly they were Tiger Woods fans. They tune in every Sunday, every weekend to watch him win a tournament. He was winning a bunch of them at the time. He won over America. Actually, he won over the world, the entire golf world. And so it changed everything. It changed how people saw, diverse people of color who were trying to play the game. Young kids wanted to be like, didn't want to be like Michael anymore, Jordan. They wanted to be like Tiger. Golf had this superstar, much like Arnold Palmer. It was the second coming of Arnold, as a matter of fact. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and in every level. Golf courses began trying to Tiger-proof their golf courses. So they'd say, well, we've got to stretch a course out to 7,500 yards. And they did that. I think the funniest thing is that Tiger's own dad, and you know this better than anybody because you're his man, you were his voice. He said, I love when he said, there's only one way to Tiger-proof a golf course. Actually shrink the golf hole, deepen the bunkers, turn the greens into the hood of a Buick, and you'll bring the shot makers back into the game. Tiger had the benefit of being an unique athletic specimen and a phenomenal short game guy. That's because of all those practices Pete talks about. He really had Hogan's precision skills, and he had Arnold's power, and I think he has Arnold's personality too, but I got his first agent called me when they dumped him, and you know what a character he was. And he asked me to write a book with him, and that was like the devil asking you to write a book with him. So I just politely said, no, thank you. But he shackled him and wouldn't let the real Tiger. I think you're seeing so much of Tiger's soul now. And I think we all loved when he came back and won finally again. I think that is one of the greatest moments in golf history. A guy who just comes back from all that and wins on the biggest stage. Anybody that ever criticized Tiger Woods loved him at that moment, and I think that's the beautiful thing about this game.
It's the self-inflicted wounds that really derailed Tiger, and I'm never going to judge him. I've never spoken ill of him in public, and I never will. And you talk about Earl, I had pretty much forgotten that Earl said that. Earl was so full of, we won't say that here, but, and he and I had some very deep conversations. The riding trainer, Tiger, Earl would call me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Of course, he was on the West Coast, and
Yeah.
It was 2 o'clock in the morning here. And we would talk till dawn about, not about the book, just about life and his philosophy, his homespun philosophies. Brilliant man. And the one thing he had that Tiger really adopted was this mental toughness. Having been in a Green Beret, that's what he contributed to Tiger. Just absolute mental toughness, and that's how Tiger was able to overcome all of the setbacks, the self-inflicted wounds. But yeah, that time with Tiger, I can't say it's over. I hate to think that it's over. But just in case it is, I have to say that was the highlight of my golfing career, my writing career, as a matter of fact.
Are there any questions that folks might have for these two fellows? Yes, go ahead. Can you speak into the mic if you have questions?
Turn it down. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both for being here. I really appreciate your presence and your sharing your gifts with us, all of you. You too, Wiley. My name is Allison, and I grew up a golfer, surprising, and actually went to college on scholarship. And I think that I'm not here to say that, but I just wanted to ask you a question, Jim. You said golf saved your life. I think golf changed my life, so that really resonates with me. And I think that golf is capable of teaching us really good lessons in life about discipline, resilience, and also honor. And I think that those are values that people today in society, especially young people, could learn. I'm also a teacher here at UNCA, and So I just want to know, like, what do you think the future of golf is for young people, and what can we do to make it more accessible and inclusive for all?
Neat.
Anyone?
Well, I'll start, and Pete can give his insight, valuable insight. COVID had a unique experience. One of the good things to come out of COVID was people got tired of being cooped up inside, and they decided, oh my gosh, there's this game. You can go out and walk for 4 hours and play a game and with friends, and you're naturally safe distance. Golf boomed during COVID. And one of the nice boom things was it brought more women. And I just wrote a piece for Global Golf Post, where I'm a columnist, about a wonderful pro out in California who has seen a huge influx of women, young women coming into the game. And you're absolutely right. This game, from the beginning, you don't move your ball. You don't cheat. If you cheat, it'll follow you the whole game, and it'll spread like a disease. You police yourself, and you learn about dignity, and you learn about the rules. And I think a lot of the culture, I'm not going to point any fingers from someone who's prematurely orange and in the presidency formerly, but culture has become coarse. People are driving insanely fast. They're running, at least in Greensboro, they're running stop signs. That's anathema to everything you learn in golf, which is it's a game of civility. You ever notice that when people finish playing golf, they take their hat off and they shake their hands, even if you hate this person and he's kicked you like a mule the whole way? Golf is it is the most civil game on earth, and it teaches you those very values. And I think that it will be around. I was asked in 2013 to give the talk when they were bringing the Open to Pinehurst again, and they were opening the new members club. And that was, if you remember, the economy was terrible. We're still in 2008. Golf courses were closing at a record rate across America. Everybody was panicking, the game's going to die, and I was asked to talk about this. So I gave my speech. I said, listen, this is a 400, maybe a 500-year-old game that has survived plagues, world wars, orange golf balls. I mean, it has survived everything, and it's going to be around 200 or 300 years from now. I just finished lastly writing a book for and about a guy who was a billionaire, maybe the happiest billionaire I've ever met, who built 2 golf courses in New Zealand. One's a public, and 2 are world-class, number 3, 4 in the world, and he owns this. He's famous for his financial stuff, and he said to me, Jim, my name will be gone. His name's Rick Kane, and he said, Kane Capital will be dust in a matter of years, but those golf courses will live on for 100 or 200 years, and they will give people joy and bring families together and friends. It doesn't get better than that.
I agree with everything that Jim said, but I would add that the great thing about golf is that it does teach you about adversity, because golf is a game of competition, and it teaches you not only to compete, but to compete civilly, to be a gentleman, to be a lady, but it also teaches you to accept failure, because in a game of golf, you fail a heck of a lot more times than you succeed. And it's what you do after you fail. The song, I fall down, but I get back up. That's what it teaches you. It teaches you to be resilient. And that's the most important thing about golf.
Bobby Jones said he never learned anything from a tournament he won.
Yeah.
I think we got one more question.
Yes, I'd like to know your comments on LIV.
Oh, no.
You thought you were going to get out of here.
You should know by now. I've been hinting the whole day.
Maybe real quick if we got a couple of...
My view, and I'm guessing my dear friend here has a similar view.
It's the same.
What's enough in this world? Do you have enough money if you're a billionaire, a millionaire, or you're a tour player? Arnold Palmer made about $17,000 the first Masters he won that year, and he was the Player of the Year 2 years later, and he had made only like $50,000. So what's enough? I mean, golf has, remember that in part thanks to Tiger, but the corporate world moved into golf, the professional game, and really blew it up. And everything from the equipment manufacturers to the clothing, So I think, you've heard all of it about sports washing, and I think the Washington Post has covered this beautifully. Sally Jenkins has done an amazing job. 75% of the tour, she says, is opposed to this deal. Think about this. I will tell you this. One of the guys that cut the deal was the president of Seminole. This is a guy who was the boss at Cantor Fitzgerald, where they lost 65 people in their company when I think it was the North Tower went down. The fact that this guy is helped bringing these two entities together to a country where they chopped a journalist into pieces, lured him in, and I just find it morally reprehensible. I don't think it's American. This is we have this old Scottish game we've made American, and we built it in America, built it into this world-famous, world-beloved game. I cannot abide the idea of just because you're a part of it, you're going to get wealthy. And the last thing, imagine you're Ricky Fowler, who was beloved by children. Kids love this guy, the guest in orange, and he was on top of the world 6 or 7 years ago, and then he hit a dry spell, as every tour golfer does, and he's been in the low country, and he can't win, couldn't even make cuts. And the Live offered him $40 million, I was told, to quit, and he didn't do it. He stayed because he knew it was the right thing to do. How do you think he feels right now when they're making this unholy deal? And I understand that the commissioner's taking a medical leave now. Well, I hope it's to find his conscience. That's what I hope.
I think that is a great place to end it. But before we do, I want to say, speaking of writing, for those of you who are interested in joining me at the Wilma Dykeman House tomorrow, we'll be there at 11 a.m. Look for your email. Look in your email for directions on how to arrive at the Wilma Dykeman House. Once you do arrive at 11 a.m., parking will be obvious. There's a little field out front before you cross the bridge. I'll be there to meet you and kind of direct you along a little bit. But if you are going to come, we will talk a little bit about Wilma Dykeman. We will look around Wilma's home. I'll talk a little bit about her influence on me as a writer. And then I will expect you to be a little creative on your own. So if you feel like seeing a beautiful place, if you feel like hearing some good stories, and you feel like being creative on a Saturday late morning, please join me tomorrow at 11 a.m. at Wilma Dykeman's house.
Great. Thank you.